Hello, this is Miss Darling in the studio. Welcome back. And if you're here for the first time, I am Miss Darling, a nickname given to me by my daughter Swoop. And previously I've made a video that deals with clusters, and you generally start out with large strips. And so as you can see here, I've gone ahead and made several in different color combinations, and that will always depend on what fabrics or paper. We're going to be working with fabric today, but of course you could do this with paper, odds and ends that you inevitably wind up with in your stash, and you have to use them up some way, and this is a great way of doing it. And so before we get into actually making another one, let me talk a little bit about why these are so helpful to you in your journal making process. Number one, I don't know what these long strips are referred to, so I'm just going to call them long strip clusters. Very imaginative, right? Anyway, you can make these, as I have done, to be the length or a little bit longer than the height of a journal that you're working on. And so why would you do that? Well, if you've got them made up, you could just cut them to fit, maybe on the left side or the right side of a page, whatever you want to do, and it just adds instant extra decoration. Now, if they were a little bit wider, of course you could glue them onto something a little bit wider. They could make a very perfect pocket, a full-length pocket for the interior of a journal. Or you can cut them into smaller pieces, which I would probably cut this eventually into 3 clusters. And, I look for logical places to maybe cut that one there. And then if that was cut there, maybe come down here and cut that one there. And then I have this left over, you see. So you look for logical places to cut them into smaller pieces. And the smaller pieces can be used, as you've seen me do many times, as focal points for a page, a focal point for a cover, but certainly for an interior page. You do have to be careful when you add decoration to them that you try to keep it as thin as possible, because if you put something really big there, it's going to just throw your pages out of kilter. And so you do have to be careful what you put on them and how thick that is. These here are a little bit thicker than a button, so they're not ideal, but they can be squished down flatter than how they come. And so I use 3 of them on this one. But anyway, back to the strips. You can use it for side pockets. You could take one and, let's just open up a journal here so I can talk about it, show it to you better. So we open this up, and let's say right here I want to put a belly band there. Well, you see I've got an instant belly band that I can run that way. I can do a cross belly band like so, and cut this in 2 and have 2 of them to use throughout the journal someplace, and that adds continuity and unity. So I've got the vertical, I've got the horizontal. They can be cut and glued onto larger pieces that make various pockets, maybe like a triangular pocket there with a little cluster on it. And what else have I got here? You could shorten them, use as decoration on an envelope that you stick in, or that you paper clip inside a journal. They can also be used as a focal point on a cover, you see, whether it's something long like that, or something that's cut up and run, you know, like up and down. So they have very many uses in the making and decorating of journals. So I do encourage you to spend time, and they're very relaxing to make. There's no rules that you have to follow on them other than color. I would say it's important to have the colors look good together so that it's pleasing to the eye. And you know, you think ahead as to what type of colors or themes that you might have for an upcoming journal to either keep for yourself or to give away or to sell. And you know, so just make sure that you work with colors that hopefully you plan on using in the not too distant future. And so that will, you know, set you up very nicely. Now, of course, you are limited to the samples or leftovers that you have on hand. But obviously, if you have fabrics left in their stash, those fabrics obviously came from fabrics that you've used already, and these are just the leftovers. So it might not be too hard to get them to work for you. I'm going to remove this and get down to my super grungy healing mat here, and let me back out a bit. So I'm going to use a piece of muslin as my background, to which I'm going to attach all of my scraps to. So I'm going to cut it right about there and rip off a piece. And this piece of muslin is just a little bit wider than the typical page vertically. It's just a little bit wider than 8.5 inches, so it's very suitable for me to use as a long strip cluster. Just going to pull off some of these threads. By the way, that's just a personal preference, because anytime you're working with something that you want to look grungy, you know, you might want to leave those little hairs, little threads that are already peeking out, or, you know, pull them off according to your taste. And I'm going to pull them off because they tend to bug me, and I also helps me to create some fringe along the side in case I want some of the background to show. Then it'll be nicely fringed for me already. And let's see, we can get 2 more out of this. Go right up along the edge here. Okay. This is just real lightweight. I think it was from a pillowcase that I had. and you know, just got old and grungy looking, so it wound up in my studio to be ripped into shreds. Okay, so we're not going to make 4 today. That would take a very long time, but I will make 1 so you can see how I do it. And like I said before, you can use fabric alone, you can use fabric and paper together, or you can just do paper, whatever you want. Okay, so we've got this. So now I'm going to pull out some of my scraps here that I've collected over, you know, probably a 2-year span. Just whenever I have a bits and bobs and bits and pieces, I just throw them in a container like this. They do get kind of squishy and wrinkled and stuff, but I don't mind that because I'm going to glue them down anyway. This piece here is perfect to cut into smaller sections and then use those. So I'm going to do that right now. So whoa, there we go. Finally, didn't want to rip. If you're going against the grain, it's harder to tear. I'm just going to cut these in the obvious places according to the design changes that's already there. So, you know, maybe I'll work with these colors and add some other fabrics to it. These are too long. I would rather they be smaller sections. Not my favorite color scheme, but you know, one thing I've noticed that just because you don't care for something that you happen to have on hand, once you put other things with it of a similar color, suddenly something that you hadn't really cared much for becomes very decorative, very appealing. And I've been really surprised sometimes at how much more I like something when I put something else with it. So anyway, here we've got quite a few little pieces here. I'm just going to throw out some pieces that might look good with it. The whole idea is using up your scraps in a way that is, you know, makes sense and that can further your creativity in a sensible way. I just don't know if I'm going to find enough here that I think will look good with that. So it might be a wasted effort to try to find some things to marry up with it. I don't know. Here's something that probably would be able to companion up. I don't know. It's not blowing me away. So I'm going to push that off to the side. And we'll open this up, see if we got anything in here to get our juices flowing. Here's some paper strips that I shoved in here. That's an interesting piece. This is paper. Doesn't that look great? And maybe I'll cut it apart, or maybe I won't, because it is pretty interesting and doesn't, kind of looks like it's already been divided up in some way. These are some of the fabrics that I used already in the samples that I made. That's an interesting piece. That's some heavier muslin that has been coffee dyed and had ink or paint applied to it. It's pretty cool. So here's something that might work with that other group. Black is always something good to throw in. It creates a lot of drama. And it looks good with neutral colors as well as other things. Here's a piece off of an old nightgown that I coffee dyed. This can be, cut up into smaller sections. Whoa. I'm not finding a whole lot of stuff here this time around. I think I used up all my best stuff in the samples I made already. Here's something that could work with those kind of custard colors up there. There's some bits of African fabric, but I don't care for the color choices they made. That might work. Okay, well, I'm going to set this up here for now. I do have some other containers I may have to pull out. But for the purpose of this video, I think I'm going to work with this piece of paper here. Only I'm going to tear it into different sections. I think we'll do that and then try to see what we can put down in the middle. This we're going to cut in two. What I do is I try to lay out in a sequence that makes sense to me. I try to lay out my bits and pieces, and then glue them lightly down and take it to a sewing machine. And so got to fill something up in here. Maybe I can throw in a little bit of that. Maybe put these closer together. Okay, so here's what I've got. I'm happy with this. So I'm going to take a glue stick and I'm going to not put a lot on, just add a little bit of glue there, just enough to kind of hold it in place. So when I take it to the sewing machine, it doesn't fall apart on me. Now the reason you can combine paper and fabric together is that any section of this is going to wind up being glued down to something else. We're going to sew these pieces in place, but then ultimately the whole thing or parts of it will be glued down to a page or a cover or something else. And so it doesn't matter at this point it doesn't matter if the whole thing is glued down at all. And I'm overlapping, always looking for a torn edge, something uneven. You notice that my cut edge is up here, and the torn bit, I deliberately tore it not straight. And the same for this, I deliberately tore it so it wasn't straight, because I don't like straight edges as much as torn edges. I like it to look deliberately torn. Okay, so now I have something I can sew together so that it's going to be there permanently, and I'm just going to leave all of these ragged threads on it for now. I might cut some of that away later, but for right now I like it. I may even pull some of the threads up. In fact, I think I will. I'm going to pull some of these threads up and then sew them down to the surface as I go, and that way they'll still be there, but they won't be in the way driving me crazy. So I will be right back after I sew this. Unfortunately, I can't show you sewing that. I'd have to rip my whole studio apart to set it up, and you know how to sew anyway. If you don't have a sewing machine, just sew by hand and nail everything down. Okay, here we are back, and let me see if I can bring this up a little closer to you so you can see what I normally do is I'll stitch all the way down, say the right side, and then come all the way up the left side and then go all the way down the middle. And that's kind of what I did, but instead of just having one row stitched down the middle, I did two. So there's actually 4 vertical rows of stitching. And then just to show you some variety that, you know, you can add a little extra design element to the, you know, the basic background. I did a stitch that came here and then crossed over and back down, and then I came back the other way, and so I've got these kind of curved. Let me see. You see how the stitching is curved there. So, you know, you can play around. It doesn't matter. More than likely, you're going to cut this into 2 or 3 sections or more, depending on the length and the size of journal that you're working with. But, you know, just the main thing is you want to make sure you secure all the various little pieces, and then before you go on to decorating it further. Now from this point, I would then try to find something, whether it's buttons or some other kind of decoration that I could add onto the top of this to kind of complete it, because, you know, it looks kind of cool the way it is now, but it will look better when I get some little focal points on there, here and there. And so we'll see what we can find, and then go on from there. From this point on, I'll either be using glue, but most often I will, for instance, if it's a button, I will sew it on because I like it to look, I like it to be actually sewed on instead of glued on. And when your background is thin enough, it's easy enough to do. So you'll have to, you know, kind of look around in your stash to see what you've collected over time, whether it's found objects or things you've purchased. I've bought a lot of kind of decorative buttons. They're hard to find, and when you do find them, they can be real expensive. Those look kind of cool. So I have this drawer for my more decorative buttons. And then I have a couple other drawers on the other side. I don't think I want to use, these are really special and I only have 2 of them. I don't think I want to use them on in this way, but I've got quite a few of this type, and I don't mind using up some of those. Some of these are real vintage. In fact, all of them would be considered vintage now. And so I think those are kind of cool, and they would really stand out against the background. So I could easily use 3 of them. And I got plenty left over. So yeah, it could be as simple as that, or you could take and add a bit of, let's see if I got any lace in here. These are extra. This is fabric that I have printed on. Yeah, most of that's not going to be usable for this purpose. You know, after a while, especially if you've collected a lot of supplies along the way, after a while you forget what you have, and so it's a good idea every once in a while to peek through your stuff. And sorry, I bumped my mic there. Hope it didn't hurt your ears. Okay, so I have this that's full of probably a little longer pieces. You know, here's a little piece of something that I might decide to sew on. Here's some more interesting black fabric that maybe I could use a little bit of that. You know, so, you know, just poke around and see what else you have to dress it up more. Like here's some black part of a lace piece. Again, we're trying to use up supplies that we have on hand already and not go purchase anything new. Just use up what we have. So I'm going to cut off a few little pieces of this. And I think I'll get out my fabric. This is a little bit too narrow to try and tear. Okay, so now I want to get rid of this paper. Now, some of your buttons are going to have a backing that looks like this, and so we need to get rid of that so it will lie flat. Okay, well, is that them? I think is that maybe them. I was looking, I'm pulling out some of my jewelry making tools, which come in real handy. If you don't have any, you should acquire some. And I was looking for the pair that cuts, and there we go. Okay, I got off some of it. Okay, so, you know, if you have wire cutters, anything like that will also work well to snap off this part here that juts up. I would like to get that cut further down. But don't know if I'm going to get there. This one was already cut and I had glued it on something. There's glue residue there, so I'd glued it to something. It didn't hold and pulled off. So anyway, okay, pushing on. I'm going to switch to some Fabrifix glue, and this works good on fabric, as you would expect, but also on surfaces that are not paper. So what are we doing here? I want to put down a little bit of lace underneath, so I'm gonna throw a little bit of glue down there and put my lace down. Then I'm going to glue the back here, and you need to put a generous amount of glue on if it is an uneven surface, because you want it to make contact all the way around if you can. That's easier to do when you're working with fabric. And I may need to snip a hole in the back here to I think I'll wait until that sets up, but I can see I'm going to need to, well, where it is fabric you can press it down easily, but I've got paper here and that's restricting that one. It's going to restrict again up there, so I'm going to go ahead and throw a little bit of this piece in here. I think it'll show up nicely on this darker section. So we'll throw that in there, and then I'm going to put glue on the back, a generous amount. And then drop that in about right there and pull my fabric up around it so it makes good contact. And then that should hold that nicely in place. And then down here, I think we'll go with this piece of, well, I think I'll use this kind of up here to bring a little bit more of the darker color up in here. Now I've got paper up here, so I'm going to I'm going to put the button about right there, but I'm going to need to put a little slit I'm going to cut the paper right there so that I can push the part that juts out. I don't have much on this one. Maybe it'd be better to use this one. Yeah. There's a little bit more of that backing that's jutting out there, so I'm going to put more glue on here and move this button to the top. And I'm going to push that part that juts out into the place where the slit is. Okay. Got a little glue on the top of my pearl there. I'll have to clean that off later after everything dries. But I have been able to push that part through all the way through, and that helps my button to lie flat. And then this one doesn't have any part jutting out, so I can glue this one directly down and not have to worry about cutting the back. Okay, so see what a difference the buttons and a little bit of extra lace or bits and bobs that you have around. Look at the difference that it makes when you dress it up just a little bit. So this is set up very nicely to be later cut into thirds, or like maybe I need a longer section, so I want 2/3 of it, or maybe I need 3 smaller sections, and it's very nicely spaced, so I can do that. And that's going to really jazz up a journal down the road where I'm using colors very similar to this. So I hope that has given you some inspiration. Just, take a day and just play with all the little bits and bobs and little odds and ends that you've collected. And if you're new and you don't have any, ask your neighbors, ask your mom or your sister, whatever people you know, if they have any scraps of fabric or paper that they'd like to unload, and tell them you have a very useful need for them, and would they happily donate them to you. Other than that, visit your thrift stores, and a lot of times they'll have, they may have a bunch of stuff that has been donated to them that they've bundled together in little sandwich bags or other containers that they sell sort of in bulk, and you can pick up some nifty supplies that way. And be on the lookout for sales, particularly stores that carry vintage products. If you're interested in having some vintage buttons like I have, I got a lot of those from a fabric store not far from me that their whole specialty is making quilts, so they often have a lot of vintage accessories that they put on sale now and again, and so I help myself when that happens. So anyway, have fun with it, make a lot of them. It'll be a very satisfying, relaxing day, and you'll feel good about getting rid of some of the excess stuff you have laying around and turn it into something useful and very beautiful. So that said, thanks for being with me. I do appreciate you very much, and please share the content with people you know, and if you're not a subscriber, think about joining up and watching more as we go along. I'd appreciate it. So thanks so much for being here. That said, this is Miss Darling calling this a wrap. Bye-bye.